Hello, I'm Anwoltos, and today I am going to be discussing a bill from the Florida Senate. I don't usually do this specific legislative uh, look into things. However, I do believe that this is important. So, this is a 2023 Florida Senate bill, Senate Bill 1248, by Senator Ingoglia. I assume that's how it's pronounced. I don't know his nationality or his ancestral nationality, but if it is Italian, it would be Ingoglia. And this bill has been heavily criticized by the media. I think a lot of the criticisms are focused on intentionally misconstruing the intentions behind this bill. However, that is not to say that I believe that the criticisms themselves are unwarranted, because it does actually lead to a lot of problems. So, what exactly is this bill? Well, the way it's being presented by a lot of people in the media is that this bill is a bill that would ban the Democratic Party in Florida, or specifically the Florida Democratic Party, because in the United States, each party does not exist as a single unified entity. All the political parties exist as several state parties that then cooperate on a national level through a national party. However, these entities are legally distinct and operate their own fundraising separately. So the United States doesn't actually have uh, centralized united parties in the way a lot of other countries do. This means that parties in the United States actually differ significantly regionally. For example, I believe there's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota. I believe it's either Minnesota or Wisconsin. I believe Wisconsin also has its own special version of the Democratic Party that formed from a merger of Democrats in that state with another party as well. And these regional partisan mergers can have an impact on the general interests of the party, both regionally as well as in a broader uh, federal context. However, that short explanation of how parties work in the United States aside, I shall read the bill. A bill to be a bill to be entitled "An Act Relating to Political Parties Providing a Short Title," amending Section 103.091 Florida statutes, I believe, requiring the division of elections to immediately cancel the filings of a political party if certain conditions exist, requiring the division to follow a certain procedure, requiring the division to provide a specific notice to certain voters, authorizing a canceled political party to re register with the Department of State, providing procedures for an organization to re register as a political party, providing an effective date. Be it enacted by the legislature of the state of Florida. Section 1. This act may be cited as the Ultimate Cancel Act. Section 2. Subsection 9 is added to Section 103.091 Florida statutes to read 103.099, political parties. The division shall immediately cancel the filings of a political party to include its registration and approved status as a political party if a party's platform has previously advocated for or been in support of slavery or involuntary servitude. In addition to applicable procedures provided for in same section. Actually, that's a different section. the following procedures must also be followed. A. If a division cancels the filings of a political party, the division must provide notice to each voter registered with the canceled political party that the political party has been canceled and his or her voter registration information will now reflect no party affiliation, and provide procedures for the voter to update his or her party affiliation to an active political party. B. Any political party canceled pursuant to this subsection may re-register with the department by filing a certificate showing the name of an organization and the names and addresses of its current officers, including the members of its executive committee, accompanied by a completed uniform statewide voter registration application as specified in section such and such for each of its current officers and members of its executive committee, which reflects their affiliation with the proposed political party, and a copy of its constitution, bylaws, and rules and regulations. 1. The name of the organization must be substantially different from the name of any other party previously registered with the department. The filing may not be submitted later than 6 months before any election in which the political party seeking to register wishes to nominate candidates for public office. Now, this is significant for a number of different reasons. What this essentially does is it cancels the registration and the corporate approval of a party if the party in the past supported slavery or involuntary servitude. Now, for the slavery specifically, this applies practically only to the Democratic Party, specifically the Florida Democratic Party, because that party was founded by Andrew Jackson himself and developed over time in the South and eventually endorsed pro-slavery positions. Meanwhile, the Republican Party doesn't actually fall under this because the Republican Party in Florida didn't organize until 1867, which is after the Civil War and after the Emancipation and all such related events, which means that the historical Republican position of free soil, which some might construe as a pro-slavery position, even if that is the case, does not apply to the Florida Republican Party, because that party was founded after such positions ceased to be viable due to the general emancipation of slaves in the United States, and particularly in the South, and specifically in Florida. So this is an obviously a bill that is obviously targeted against the Florida Democratic Party. However, I do believe that there is an issue here, and that is involuntary servitude. Because in Florida, historically speaking, and the United States in general, it remains legal to, from a constitutional perspective, to have involuntary servitude of convicts. Now, I believe most states banned many forms of convict labor, but I believe that Florida historically had some convict labor, especially some that was abused. Now, it's a bit more complex to understand whether or not the Republican Party supported specific instances of convict labor, and whether convict labor would fall under this statute. In my opinion, involuntary servitude can be construed to include convict labor. Or other types of labor that might be demanded upon criminals in the system of the prison system, the penal system. It could also be construed to involve labor of those who have been drafted. Involuntary servitude may be construed to include that. And I note that the definitions for these terms are not specifically included here. Furthermore, I would point out that, of course, this would be perhaps a problem for other political parties. So I don't think that that is a very sound wording for this law. I would also say that an additional problem here arises from the situation of Section 3, the act shall take effect July 1st, 2023. The Democratic primary is going to be on February 4th, 2024. So this gives the Democrats 7 months, but according to this, the filing may not be submitted later than 6 months before any election which the political party seeking to register wishes to nominate candidates for public office. So there's essentially a 1 month time window for the Democratic Party to respond specifically to this. And of course, the Democratic Party, if it is deconstituted by this law, would have to re-register under a name that presumably does not include the term democratic. Now, practically speaking, what this law would do is it would deconstitute the Florida Democratic Party. Now, that doesn't mean that the structure of a party ceases to exist. This isn't like lustration that you see in a lot of Eastern European countries, where politicians are not allowed to re-enter office. This isn't the same as the banning of political parties that happens in Russia or Ukraine. What this is, however, is something that would cause a lot of chaos if it were to be implemented, because it would essentially demand that the Democratic Party entirely re-register its party. And since, according to this law, automatically every person who is a member of that party is deregistered from the party and loses party affiliation, it means that that the Democratic Party would have all that time to have to re-register everyone in the party. So it is likely that they would lose a significant amount of voters for the political primary, not the presidential and the national and the actual elections, but the primaries. They would lose a significant number of voters for the primaries simply by virtue of people having to re-register to vote. Not to vote in general, but to participate in the internal elections of that party. Now, the obvious issue with this is that this is an obvious attack on a particular political party, and that is a thing that a lot of people in the media are pointing out. However, one thing that I think is not being looked at, one thing, however, that I do not believe justifies this, is that the author of this bill, Senator Ingoglia, he phrased his speech when he was submitting this bill. He phrased it as a response to the Democrats' cancellation of various historical figures and historical monuments and various historical things associated with past immorality. And his argument is that in order to not be hypocrites, they should also cancel the Democratic Party, which as an institution participated and promoted slavery in the past. Now, the problem with this is, I would say, twofold. On the one hand, I think it's bad politicking. And on the other hand, I think it's inaccurate. And what do I mean by inaccurate? I don't mean that the Democratic Party did not participate in all those things. I don't mean that that there weren't prominent uh, KKK members in the Democratic Party during segregation and during that time period. I don't mean that the Democrats are a moral party nowadays. I don't consider them to be a moral party for various reasons, uh, including abortion, among other things. Although that alone for me is a deal breaker. What I do mean is that a lot of people have a mistaken assumption about political parties in the United States that they have a long and continuous history, that they can take the party at the beginning, the middle, and end of its history and call it the same. The problem with this is that it's not historically accurate. The Democrats today don't support slavery, at least not in any way that the Democrats in the 1850s would have supported slavery. So, but before anybody tries to twist definitions of what slavery is and what they want to consider slavery, uh, before anyone makes some weird Marxist argument that wage labor is slavery and such things, the Democrats do not support what the Democrats in the 1850s supported. The Democrats today do not support the KKK. Being an active member of the KKK in either major political party would cause significant problems for anyone seeking to be elected to political office. And another thing to note is not simply the negative, that is the things that the Democrats don't do today that they did back then, but also the positive change. And when I say positive, I don't mean things that are necessarily good. What I mean is, rather than denying something, affirming something. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the Democratic Party absorbed a large portion of what at the time had been the People's Party, a somewhat populist, labor-oriented movement, and the Democrats uh, organized and allied with various labor and labor unionist movements that were emerging in the United States. And this can be seen particularly strongly in the New Deal era, when the Democratic Party worked very strongly with these organizations. And it's not just the Democrats that did this; the Republicans did this too, to some extent. The way the way political parties work in the United States is you have two big tent parties that have to constantly change and adjust in order to maintain their dominance. And to do that, they have to absorb positions from disruptive smaller parties in order to remain competitive against their opponents. and to also prevent those smaller disruptive parties from growing and displacing them. So, what this means is that the changing political discourse over time significantly changes the parties. Now, the advantage in this is that the parties become responsive to the particular issues of their day. The disadvantage is that the parties don't have any long term consistency in their principles. Neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party has a unifying ideology. So when somebody tries to pretend that the Democratic Party today is similar to the Democratic Party in the 1850s or the 1820s or the 1920s or the 1950s, that's simply wrong. And even in the past few decades, the Democratic Party changed significantly, as has the Republican Party. And once again, I'm not saying that these changes are necessarily good or necessarily bad, but we have to acknowledge that these parties change. And not only that, that the parties are composed of several subgroups that focus on different policies that disagree significantly. So when somebody that takes a look at a Republican raising taxes and says, I thought Republicans were the party that wanted to lower taxes. And the answer is both ideas are false. Republicans in general don't want to raise taxes. Republicans in general don't want to lower taxes. There are simply different kinds of Republicans. And the same thing is true about the Democratic Party. Now, some might say, well, this bill, of course, isn't a bill that people intend to pass. It's a bill that's simply meant to point out the hypocrisy of the Democrats. And this is the part where I get into why this is bad politicking. For one, let us assume for a moment that this bill is not intended to be a bill to be passed, that it's merely a statement of protest. This is an abuse of the legislature. If that is the case, it is an abuse of the legislature because a bill should not be proposed if it should not be desired to be passed. That is my opinion. Some people might disagree. Some people might be okay with broad gestures of activism. But my opinion is, if you don't want a bill to actually become law, don't propose it. Now, let's assume for a moment that the senator actually intended for this bill to become law. Well, once again, it's an inaccurate analysis of history and of the way political parties work. So it's not based on the reality of the situation. But also, it essentially denigrates the moral high ground. Because if the honorable senator wished to propose the idea that it was inappropriate or excessive to want to cancel various historical figures, historical events, and various important memories of the past that a lot of people in Florida have. If he desired to point out that that was bad, he should have simply said so. He should have strongly opposed those who wanted to cancel these various things. He should have taken the moral high ground and not retaliated in this manner. Because what this does is it essentially gives light to the idea that the Republicans simply aren't better than the Democrats. They simply want to do the same thing, but with their people coming out on top. That's essentially what someone who is very critical of both parties would see this as. And of course, also, there's the whole issue of how this could easily be construed by the media to simply being the Republicans trying to take power by getting rid of the Democratic Party and turning Florida into a one-party state, which is not actually what the bill does, but it is something that people who won't read the bill, people who won't want to understand the background of why this is happening, and will simply listen to what they're told in the media, that's what they will believe. And it's very easy to believe because it is not false that this bill would cancel the Democratic Party in Florida. It is not false that that any party called the Democratic Party would not be able to operate in the state of Florida. That is not false. That anybody who is registered as a Democrat with the Florida Democratic Party would lose that party registration and would not be able to regain it. That is also not false. So the criticisms based on those points, since they are rooted in an accurate analysis of the law, are highly credible, even if they are designed specifically to misconstrue the situation. And that gets also to another point I have. And that is, does this actually violate people's First Amendment rights, you might ask? Whether, and putting aside the issue of specific applications of laws and where the law applies, regionally speaking, I think an issue here is that, let's say the Republican Party wants to be the champions of liberty. They want to be seen as the people that support liberty. This does not lend credence to that. Because what this is essentially saying is that people who want to associate and organize as a Democratic Party are not allowed to freely associate and freely organize in that way. And this goes to a bigger problem I have with the politics of every single state in the union individually. And that is that all states essentially have a system wherein political parties are officially part of the governmental system in the way that they operate. This is most obviously seen in the laws regarding the Electoral College that each and every state has passed, which demands that electors be chosen by the parties. That is to say, by party affiliation, and then the party submits that, rather than the electors being elected individually by those in their districts, as was the general assumption by the Federalists. And of course, speaking of Andrew Jackson as the founder of the Florida Democratic Party, he himself also significantly benefited by these changes that had occurred, and these changes allowed him to become president in the first place. But essentially what I'm arguing here is that there should be a stronger sense of free association in the way that people are allowed to organize. And obviously speaking, if the corporate side of a political party engages in treason, espionage, sedition, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, obviously there should be legal action taken against such parties. But if a party doesn't actually do anything of a sort and simply advocates for bad legislation, bad positions on various things, I don't think that that is sufficient to say that the party should be canceled, by law anyway. If the members of a party wanted to cancel the party, that would be fine. But I don't think that the law should be canceling parties. So that is my opinion on this issue. And I understand that some people might think that I'm reading too much into this, that obviously this is merely a publicity stunt. But as I said before, this, as a publicity stunt, generates bad optics for the Republican Party and does not lend credence to taking the moral high ground, which is ideally what the Republicans should be attempting to be doing, but are not. And we see this all throughout the country, that it would be so easy for the Republican Party to take the moral high ground on various issues, but they simply choose not to because it doesn't benefit the party. They want to own the libs, which of course doesn't make sense because the Republican Party is mostly consists of liberals anyway. Um, but that's my opinion on the issue. Tell me what you think in the comment section below. Is this a good bill? Is this a bad bill? Thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on A Will Over and Out.